Orpita di, are you looking at the YouTube live stream?
No, just let me do that. Wait for it.
Yeah, just let's go live on YouTube and then I'll welcome. Are we live?
Just give me a minute. I'll just. I think we are live.
Okay, fantastic. Then I'll start.
Just,
Right. It's evening where I am, but it's probably morning for many of you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to day 2 of Play and Playthings in South Asian Children's Literature that Atlisa is doing, a 2-day symposium. And I am Ritika. I will be moderating this panel. I am one of the co-founders of Atlisa, and I'm doing my PhD in Children's Literature from Jadavpur University. If you were around yesterday, then you got a huge dose of my awkward energy. Apologies for more of that. That will happen over the course of the next couple of hours. The speakers for this particular panel, Linguistic Play, are two fantastic researchers who are both favorites of mine, Onrima Chondo and Stella Chitralekha Vishwas. They will introduce themselves. But if you haven't read their writing before on South Asian Bengali children's literature and contemporary Indian English children's literature, please find yourselves a copy of their work. A lot of it is available online. Find yourselves a copy of their work and read it because they are so good. Stella, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Am I audible?
You are.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Stella Chitralekha Vishwas, and I am currently working as a faculty member in the Department of English, Sarojini Naidu College for Women, Kolkata. I completed my PhD last year, and my thesis actually it was a study of, it was a cross-cultural and a historical study of books and the periodicals that were produced for children during the 19th and the early 20th centuries, and how the concepts of childhood were sort of evolving in tandem with the developments in children's literature during time. So yeah, paper today will be on Shukumar Rai's Abul Tabul, and yeah, I'll begin after Onurima introduces herself.
Onudi?
Hi. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Anurima Chanda, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of English at Birsa Munda College, which is under North Bengal University. I completed my PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University on the it was basically on taboos in contemporary Indian English children's literature. And my MPhil was on nonsense literature, which is very ironically also that was my entry point into children's literature. So before I discovered children's literature, I discovered nonsense literature, and perhaps we'll be talking about this when I read out my paper or when we have a discussion, that often nonsense literature is kind of clubbed under or with children's literature. So nonsense was my beginning point in some sense, and I'm very petrified that I hope I remember everything that I did at that point of time, because since then I've kind of moved into more into contemporary children's literature, and also I'm one of the co-founding members of Atlisa. So yeah, that's about me.
I just realized that I completely forgot about the housekeeping rules. So before Stella starts her presentation, I will quickly go over the housekeeping, which is the speakers will have about 10 to 12 minutes to give their presentations, after which we will have a discussion between the two of them, and then we will open up to Q&A. The Q&A will not be recorded. The discussions will be recorded, but if interesting questions or comments come in the chat during the Q&A, during the discussion, we might just pick them up and address them. We'll do that organically. Please keep your video and audio muted if you are not speaking or presenting to help with bandwidth purposes, especially. We have speakers from all over the world, many of whom do not speak English as their first language. So we would request anyone who is unmuting themselves to speak, whether that be the speakers or attendees asking questions, to speak slowly and clearly so that everyone can get what you're saying. Closed captions has been enabled. So you are welcome to enable or close captions, the CC as you wish for your convenience. Please be polite, respectful, and not discriminatory in any comments or questions that are asked. Rudeness will not be tolerated. We will instantly remove anyone who is impolite to anybody in the room at the moment. We are also keeping an eye on the YouTube. So if anyone who's watching from the YouTube, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. We will address them here. Right. I think that is pretty much for the housekeeping. Did I miss something else?
Ritvika, just a sec. We are just lagging a little bit behind with the YouTube thing because it's showing different things on different profiles. So just wait for like 2 minutes so that we can sort this out and you can start it again.
Okay. In that case, should we wait for Stella to wait for it to go live before Stella begins her presentation?
Yeah, just wait for so that we have Stella and Anurima these both of their papers on YouTube too. Just give us a minute to sort this out.
Okay.
Could you just help us out with that?
I can't because my laptop is not working. I'll show what's happening right now. This is insane. It's been 25 minutes and this is basically what's going on.
We are live. It's showing on YouTube. Go.
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness. Right. Stella, then you can begin.
Yeah, all right. So the title of my paper is Where the Mind is Fear, Laughter and Play in Sukumar Rai's Abul Dabul. Sukumar Rai was writing at a time when pedagogical trends in Bengal were largely influenced by a scientific outlook and rationalism derived from Western tenets of enlightenment. Parallelly, the age was also witnessing a folkloric revival through the proliferation of fairy tales, folk tales, limericks, abridged mythological texts for children, brotokathas, etc. The flourish in imaginative liberty within literary output during these golden years of Bengali children's literature was part of a conscious attempt to forge a love for indigeneity and traditional roots within the minds of the young readers. The race towards colonial modernity had by then drastically impacted all walks of life in 19th century Bengal, including works meant to be produced for children. The colonial machinery in the form of various formal educational institutions and the printing press changed the ideological temper of the populace, especially the middle classes who were seeking to benefit from new opportunities under the colonial rule. Even while conforming to certain pedagogical norms ushered in by the imperialists, the native literati gradually began to foresee the urgent necessity for developing an alternative corpus of leisure literature in order to supplement children's creative interests. The advent of juvenile periodicals and works for light reading within the comforts of the home expanded the horizon of Bengali children's literature significantly. What can be estimated from the works produced from the mid-19th century onwards is a gradual politicization in constructing various models of ideal native childhood. Even while the upbringing of boys and girls were based on differential notions of sociocultural agency, certain set ideas of behavioral, intellectual, and moral orientation were imparted through the narratives and prototypes in the literary works produced for children. The turn of the 19th century was marked by fervent nationalism in Bengal, particularly with the rise of the Swadeshi Revolution in the wake of the 1905 partition decreed by Lord Curzon. Texts for children featured dauntless nationalistic heroes and models of pristine traditional femininity whose lives were dedicated towards the cause of the motherland. With the advent of Ray's works upon the scene, however, a novel turn could be detected in the generic possibilities of Bengali children's literature. Primarily known for his penchant for social satire, marked by a generous dose of genial humor, Ray exploded the boundaries within which native childhood had remained circumscribed till then. The very idea of composing nonsense literature for young readers entailed a departure from conforming to an adult-centric world of convention. He strives to liberate the child's consciousness from the rigors imposed on it by active adult intervention. In Ray's works, the child is projected as an autonomous being, left to decipher the world and its symbols on its own, instead of relentlessly engaging in forcing meaning out of everything. Ray's child protagonists and readers are encouraged to question the fetters of linguistic and institutional control and indulge in unhindered laughter and delight through the process of reading. Championing the cause of laughter for laughter's sake, Ray's works promote notions of carefree whimsicality and larger than life imaginative flights, thereby countering the pressures of a materialistic world hung up on fulfilling obligations and responsibilities. Abol Tabol, the text in question, was a collection of rhymes and poems which were published only posthumously in 1923 by U. Ray and Sons. Some of the works, however, had previously appeared in various issues of the Sandesh magazine. Children's literature during this period was massively influenced by the creative spirit advocated by Rabindranath Tagore, one of the biggest stalwarts of the Bengal Renaissance, who celebrated the romantic trope of the escapist child drawn towards the promises of adventure in the outside world. In fact, the urge to escape the restraining bounds of the school and the home loomed large within celebrated texts of the time like Kirer Putul, Shishu Bholanath, Otithi, Shishu, Khapchara, Jhalapala, Pagla Dashu, Nalok, Buro Angla, etc. However, any instance of child rebellion would be formulaically resolved with a neat conclusion, whereby the child would be restored to the security of the home and the causal factors for such truancy removed. Amid such a context, works like Abul Tabul paved the path for children to engage in imaginative recesses that rupture the structures of conventional logic and the excessive, even morbid emphasis on rationality in the adult world. The counter narratives constructed through the reading of these works enabled children to derive some degree of thrill and pleasure amidst the boredom of a quotidian setup, either at school or at home. However, this does not mean that the writer had merely attempted to charm his readers with a random assortment of innovative wordplay or linguistic experimentation. The depth and substance of the poems within Abul Tabul, which were written during a time of strict literary surveillance, raised the awareness of the readers towards the detrimental impacts of colonial thraldom, while also evading the direct risk of proscription. The moderate satiric vein which runs throughout the poems and rhymes seek to demythify the sheen of the adult world by exposing its hypocrisies, pedantry, shallowness, foppery, sycophancy, and relentless insensibility. The children are rather encouraged to grow into conscious, creative beings who understand the importance of play and leisure instead of becoming enmeshed into the snares of excessive rationality. By enabling children to become autonomous, intelligent individuals with imaginative prowess, Ray's works posited a challenge to imperial rule that would only pressurize children to emerge as dull products of the colonial system. Removed from the cultural demands of embracing certain valorized tropes of social and moral conduct, the readers of Ray's works are free to undertake delightful sojourns into his topsy-turvy world of imaginative relish. The 10th Rasa or Khayal Rosh, formulated by Ray, as Michael Heman suggests, preserves the sanctity of his art, which would otherwise be dismissed by critics as mere infantile gibberish. Despite having been heavily inspired by Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear, Ray's indigenization of a Victorian literary genre that went on to become immensely loved by readers across generations speaks volumes about the serious and sustaining quality of his art. He uses the popular form of the choras or folk rhymes, but fuses it with the elements of nonsense verse to liberate his readers from the tyranny of didactic reading and in turn colonial authority. It is through these rhymes in Abul Tabul that Ray evokes both laughter and awareness about the foppery and ridiculous habits of native men impersonating their white counterparts, whom they considered in all ways superior, or else the stereotypical imperial mindset to condescend towards the supposedly effeminate Bengali Babu. Amidst a scenario where native masculinist ideals were being emphatically projected and glorified within the popular imaginary, Ray's works expose their lopsidedness, shallowness, and questionable status. Through the witty, innovative use of language, he not only criticizes the power equation between the colonizer and the colonized, but also provokes his readers to reassess the socio-political conditions of their times. Titles like Khichuri, Gofchuri, Tash Goru, Kimbhut, Humra Potash, Hukomukho Hangla, Bhoy Peona, Ram Gorure Chana, etc., which feature in Abul Tabul, are composed in the spirit of countering the world of rationality and civilization with that of apparent absurdity and nonsense. From satirizing repressive colonial laws that trod upon the dignity and the liberty of the colonized subjects, to the willing servants of colonial domination who readily imitated English manners and morals, meek and cowardly native subjects bowing before imperial oppression, Brahmo Puritans who lacked any sense of humor, and so on, the socio-political critique which forms the base of Ray's works have evoked untainted laughter and pleasure from the juvenile readers. The delightful mixture of ambivalence, laughter, anti-colonial commentary, and delightful illustrations drawn by Ray himself had significant impacts upon the molding of children in an era otherwise marked by fiery patriotism. The wide range of fantastic creatures sketched upon whimsical combinations of uh, hybrid features that are given no explanation whatsoever rouse the delight and curiosity of all juvenile readers irrespective of their sexes. The absurd amalgamations of interbreed features in characters like Harsh Charu or Bokochap or Hatimi, etc., in the poem Khichuri, and the other equally hybrid medleys of humans and other creatures, both real and fictional, remain beyond the stringencies of gender codes and provide merry laughter to all the readers. Now, before I conclude with my presentation, I would like to share some pictures that I've put together from three different books actually. I've referred to the original text in Bangla, as well as two different versions of the translated text. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get hold of the entire translation done by Shukanto Chaudhuri. So I have only used a couple of the poems which were translated and which were available online. The other poems that I have, the translated poems that I have referred to uh, were actually, the translations were attempted by Dr. Ifta Chaudhuri, who is a professor at Texas A&M University. So I'll just share my screen, show these pictures before concluding the presentation. So just give me a moment, please.
Stella, you're muted.
Stella, you're muted.
Am I audible now?
You're audible, but
Am I audible now?
Did your screen share not work? Because we saw like a glimpse of the first slide and then it was gone.
The moment I'm sharing my screen, the audio is automatically getting muted. So I'm not sure what the issue is. I'll just check once more. Please bear with me. I apologize for the inconvenience.
You're muted again, but we can see your screen.
You can send the link in the chat and provide access to one of us maybe, and we could share the screen while you can keep your audio on.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, this is the first picture that I have decided to show. The one on the left appears as the first poem in the collection Abol Dabol, the original Bangla version. And I have also attached the English translation done by Ifta Chaudhary on the right side. So what the writer begins with is this very gentle exhortation to the readers, sort of luring them into this world which would be free from all the stringent rules of the real materialistic adult world, and there would be no fear of adult trepidation, and they would actually be completely free to do anything they like. They would be free to indulge in any kind of fantasy or any kind of adventure that they would wish to, and there would be no one to hold them back. And he actually says, crazy, curious minds wander around, dancing all the way without any care. Come on in and do the real grotesque. No code or rule can hold you back here. So he keeps on, kind of encouraging the readers to come and step into this world where he promises a different kind of experience to the readers, where they would not have to learn anything, mug up anything by heart, just to pass their examinations, or learn something that would sort of contribute to their moral edification. So this is complete and pure leisure that he is promising them. So again, the same poem appears in an extended form at the end of the collection as well. So this is like an extended version of the prologue, which appears at the very beginning, the prologue poem. And here again, if you see the illustration given, the illustration in the Bengali original, there is a small child is seen floating above the clouds, and all his books and stationary items lie beyond. I mean, they are left behind within the worldly realm, and he has now set himself free from the bounds of the quotidian, and he has risen above to this transcendental realm where he is floating above the clouds, where he's enjoying himself, and he is engaging in different kinds of imaginative recesses that was otherwise limited in scope for him within the bounds of the home and the school. So this is another very interesting poem where Shukumar Rai actually challenges the structures of grammar and the very idea of language and its ability to convey meaning. And in doing so, he also tries to, in a subtle manner, sort of through the illustrations, he tries to satirize the native men who try to mimic their imperial colonial masters in order to gain certain privileges within the colonial rule. So while also challenging institutional control, linguistic control, all these structures that were imposed upon the adult mind that sort of tried to keep it within fetters, he also takes his agenda to a different level, to a different kind of anti-colonial level altogether. So another poem, this idea is sort of, it keeps on recurring in different poems. So this particular poem, Kim Bhoot, which Shukanta Chaudhary translates as Super Beast, is again a direct mockery of those very ridiculous Bengali men who try to mimic the manners, the morals, the habits, the appearance, the vocabulary, and everything that they can find in the lives of the colonial masters. And at the end, they are left bemoaning the lack of their very own identity. So by sacrificing their original identity, they are sort of, flung into a state of crisis from which they can never recover. So this entire poem actually talks about this precarious state in which these, people with enslaved minds, these Bengali people are living in. And in a certain way, he tries to raise the consciousness of the children, urging them to become creative beings, conscious beings, and not just unquestionably and blindly imitate and mimic everything that they see around them. Again, this poem, Kumro Potash, the translation, English translation of which is Potbelly Pumpkin, done by Ifti Chaudhary. So in Kumro Potash, he talks about those men who go around town and they sort of try to pressurize people to be in awe of them, and they try to, they are ridiculous in their appearance and in their gait and their mannerisms, and people actually mock them behind their backs. But on their face, people are afraid of them because of the affinity of these people with, the white men, the British men. And therefore, this ridiculous way in which these, sort of, if I might use the term, Macaulay's middlemen, the way in which their mechanisms work in order to gain privileges for themselves and also sort of, oppress, their own kind in a certain way, is kind of satirized against by Ray in this particular poem. So there is another poem called Bombagore Raja, where again, the king of Bombagor. So in this poem, he tries to sort of directly talk about the repressive colonial laws and the certain futile practices that were prevalent, meaningless sort of rules that were passed during the colonial times, which were actually of no, which did not really actually have any substance within them. And these laws only caused, sort of disadvantage to the subjects. So this is another poem. And there is again this very interesting poem called Ekushe Ain, which translates as Code 21. So in Ekushe Ain, he talks about this fictive land where the land is actually very gorgeous, but the laws of the land are very outrageous. If you look at the first two lines of the English translation, so he talks about the various, kinds of atrocities that are, kind of done against the subjects by the people who are the rulers. And there are, the people are actually charged for no crimes or no offenses at all, and they have to pay heavy fines or they are put behind bars. And there are various other kinds of repressive sort of acts that are done against them. So he actually, under the garb of, nonsense verse and this very, clubbing together nonsense verse and the very traditional form of children's folk rhymes or the children's limericks, he tries to again, push forth.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're a bit over time, so we need to move on to the next speaker. So could you wrap up, please?
Yes. So these are the last two slides that I wanted to show you. This is Ram Guru Chana, and the other one is Tash Guru. So both of these, Ram Guru Chana can be looked at as specifically as a kind of satire against those Brahmo Puritans who lack the basic sense of humor. And there was, and at the same time, he also satirizes the stereotypical imagination within the colonial mind, to think of Bengali men as very lazy, as excessively serious, very bookish, and not really physically agile. Being very kind of having a very sultry mood and not indulging in any kind of activities that would uplift their spirits in any way. So he kind of tries to attempt both at the same time. And this is the last the last illustration of the poem that I'll be showing. It's the title of this poem is Tash Guru. I'm not sure whether pseudo bull, the English translation, actually kind of captures the essence of this word that is Tash Guru. And of course, the problematics involved in the entire process of translation is a very different and elaborate issue altogether. So again, Tash Guru talks about, it satirizes those men who are, just blind followers of their colonial masters, and without even thinking properly. Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and yeah.
I wish we had more time to go over the images, but we will have these in the Q&A as well, because the illustrations are fascinating. Rave did many of them himself, so that's a whole world of nonsense in art to unpack with that. But we have to move on to Onurima Chanda's presentation now. Onudi, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rika. And thanks a lot, Stella. Also, not just for that great paper, but also because you kind of grounded my own entry point into the topic that I'm going to talk about today. And in a sense, I feel like I will be covering a little bit about the before and the after of the period that you were looking at. The title of my paper is Nana Sense in a Runcible Hat, Study of Contemporary Indian English Literary Nonsense. And while we are talking about nonsense has always kind of existed in literature, even though the cultural and the sociological impetus of the Victorian age kind of gave rise to a formal literary genre in the West, literary nonsense. And here, like Stella has already mentioned, mainly through the writings of Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll. And even though we kind of, whenever we talk about nonsense, we kind of fall back to that period, and when we are talking about the Indian context, we very understandably kind of move into Sukumar Ray. This written form of nonsense was actually preceded and aided by two branches, one that can be traced to the folk tradition, and the other which had its origin in the intellectual adult literary tradition. It kind of drastically changed the face of children's literature at that time. And here I'm talking mainly about Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear. Many of the issues that Stella kind of raised in the work of Sukumar Ray, where he's kind of hitting against the education system, against the colonial practices, are also kind of seen reflected in the writings of Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll, where they are also kind of hitting at the kind of very didactic mode of children's literature. But even though this kind of provided a kind of a grounding, it also was later on appropriated for adult audiences in the writings of Edward Gorey, Marvin Peake, James Joyce, Wallace Stevens, Gertrude Stein, among others, along with influencing the surrealist, the Dadaist, the absurdist, and with growing realization of the genre's inherent potential for subversion, many writers were propelled to appropriate its techniques in questioning reality, existence, efficacy of language, giving rise to a very different strand of nonsense. India, as an English colony, inherited this nonsense legacy, especially under the championship of Sukumar Ray. And since it already had its own indigenous traditions of nonsense, this gave rise to the modern Indian nonsense, which kind of emerged as a hybrid product. However, given the vastness of the country in terms of its diverse language, region, culture, studies have not been at the level, I feel like the genre has not been able to elicit a collective response to the level that it has found in the West. Trying to address this lacuna within the study of Indian nonsense, this is again a book that Stella refers to. Michael Heyman, Sumanyu Satpathy, and Anushka Ravishankar put together this, excellent diverse bunch of a collection of nonsense verse and prose, which is gathered from across the length and breadth of the country, along with attempting to read them under the lenses of Indian aesthetics in their eclectic collection, the 10th Rasa. This is how the book looks. Following in the footsteps of Ray, who had implied that nonsense is an expression of the spirit of whimsy, as Stella had already mentioned, the Khayal Rosh, they tried situating nonsense within the Rasa theory, providing a very unique direction to the discourse. Taking a cue from this particular idea, I will be looking at select texts of Indian English literary nonsense, especially by Kaushik Vishwanath and Anushka Ravishankar. I was actually hoping to look at Anushka Ravishankar's work also, but I feel like I won't have the time to. So in that case, I'll just be focusing on Kaushik's text. This essay will attempt to critically engage with nonsense from the perspective of the rasa theory. Being a theoretical perspective used to study the evocation of Titash, if you can go back to the previous slide, I think. No, the previous slide. Yes, I think we can stop here. Being a theoretical perspective used to study the evocation of emotions in any work of art, it will be interesting to apply the same to analyze a genre which is primarily identified in the way that it negates emotions. And this, I want to stress on this, how nonsense ends up negating emotion. Truly, the world of nonsense is unique. Here, the emotions don't work in the way that it would work in the quote unquote normal world. Death and violence here do not arouse bhayanak or terror, as should have been the case, but a sense of marvelous or laughter, quickly escalating into wonder, chamatkar. How does a work of nonsense bypass these intermediate stages of generating emotions to reach directly this final stage of blissful wonder? And what I'll be doing is, by drawing the genre's link with the oldest texts of nonsense as found in the mystic domain, which used this particular characteristic of the form to make the initiated yogin achieve enlightenment, this essay will finally show how the key to this mystery lies in the way nonsense uses language to challenge the knowable world, the play with language, turning it upside down and thereby making all polarities disappear to give a sense of wonder. As studies show, the Indian subcontinent has always been rich in nonsensical elements, although its dominance had mainly been restricted to the spiritual plane and folk culture. In the mystic domain, the thorn texts, which can be traced back to the early medieval period, have been conjectured to be the earliest examples of nonsense, apart from the form having existed, albeit intermittently, from the time of the Vedas and the Upanishads. Later, it was highly popularized by Kabir in his upside-down language, or Ulat Bansi, which he borrowed from the Sandha Bhasa used in the Tantric Yoga and the Naths. It is believed by a majority of critics that this sort of language was used by spiritual leaders to mask answers to grave philosophical questions in a childlike humor. By evoking this childlike state of mind, it sought to break the habitual thought patterns in philosophical mysticism, aiming towards enlightenment. Additionally, the simple and easy nature of this form, easy to grasp and fun to hear or chant, made it popular among the common people and helped spread spiritual messages with greater ease. Traces of it are also found in medieval Indian poetry of around the 16th century in kingly courts, where the poets would have contests to test their skills of literary analysis of complex poetic forms. The winners would be the ones who could challenge the others with their nonsensical wordplay, all of it maintained in perfect formal style. This is almost similar to the English strand of literary nonsense, which plays with language all the time, maintaining a very, very strict formal outer structure. The folk tradition of India was equally rich in their use of nonsense, much more irreverent in nature. Various other kinds of nonsense also existed. But owing to the diverse languages of the country, they are known by different names in different languages. But when studied, the techniques used that were used in these texts were more or less the same as its English counterpart, although the themes were sometimes very, very culturally related to the region that it has been conceived in. Finally, with the colonial impact since the mid-19th century, or maybe even before that, and the exposure to English education, the English works of nonsense found their way into the subcontinent. It particularly influenced areas like West Bengal and Maharashtra, and the neighboring states of Bengal like Orissa and Assam, where it was influenced more from the Bangla influence than the English one, and a modern strand of Indian literary nonsense emerged. In Bengali, it was popularized by Shukumar Ray, Rabindranath Tagore, many others. In Oriya, Brajanath Borojena's Chaturo Binod is considered to be one of the most pioneering work in this field. Till a long time ago, literary nonsense India was mainly written in the indigenous languages, But over the last couple of years, it has also found a new voice in the works of writers like Anushka Ravishankar, Kaushik Vishwanath, Sampurna Chatterjee, and many others. And I'll be looking at Kaushik's work. But before that, I just wanted to go over a little bit about rasa theory and how it kind of applies, or the way that I will be reading the text. And Titash, I think now we can move to the next slide. Yeah. The foundations of rasa theory can be traced back to Bharat's Natya Shastra. The main idea of the text emerges from one of Bharata's famous aphorisms: out of the union of the determinants, the consequence, and the transitory mental states, the birth of rasa takes place. To elaborate on it, the text proposes 8 fundamental feelings, instincts, emotions, or mental states, which it calls sthai bhava, which are inborn in a man's heart and permanently exist in their mind in the form of latent impressions, vasana, that is derived from experiences gathered in the present life or from inherited instincts. They are delight, rati, laughter, hasa, sorrow, shoka, anger, krodha, heroism, utsaha, fear, bhay, disgust, jigupsha, and wonder, vismay. These latent impressions emerge into the conscious on occasions in real life. So in real life, when the elements of karan, causes, karya, effect, and the concomitant elements, or the sahakarin, which gets attached to these thai bhavs and excites them to kind of manifest into an emotional outburst. But if we kind of try to situate these 3 states in the on the stage or in works of poetic expression, they would be known as what Bharat calls as the determinants or the vibhava, the consequence or the anubhava, and the transitory mental states or the vabhichari bhava. The state of consciousness that one achieves on such occasions is like a juice or the ras that flows, which are initially it was 8 in number: the erotic shringar, the comic hasya, the pathetic karuna, the furious rodra, the heroic the veer, the terrible bhayanak, the odious bibhatsa, and the marvelous adbhut. And later on, another 9th one was added: serenity or sama, or the quietistic shanta. Together they form the 9 rasas. But what is interesting is that in trying to understand where this rasa is it evoked in the actors, or is it evoked in the audience who is watching these people perform on the stage or reading these poetic works? Here, this Kashmiri scholar, Bhattanayak, brought in a change of kind of situating it within the audience or the readers and talking about this theory of universalization, which was later perfected by Abhinavagupta, where they talk about how, while we are experiencing rasa, there is a suspension of our consciousness which gives rise to a sense of universality by shattering the obstacles of disturbing the influence of individual egos. That is the reason when we are watching somebody, say, crying on the stage, and we feel the karuna, we are, we do not feel so heartbroken that, we can't watch it anymore. But there is still a sense of chamatkar. So this is where I am kind of grounding it and entering into the works of nonsense that I'll be looking at, where what is happening is that through a use of play with language, nonsense is creating an alternative dimension of a world that is a stranger to us all. And that is the reason, instead of feeling the kind of emotions that we should feel normally about that sort of a situation, we are either reduced to uncontrollable laughter, the power of laughter that Stella was continuously talking about, which Shukumar Ray had tried to raise in his, kind of create in his work. But there is also this sense of bliss or wonder that is there. I know I'm running out of time. I could have delved a little deeper, but maybe I think that they'll come up in the discussion. What I'll do is I'll quickly move to the text that I have to discuss today. I'll be talking about Kaushik Vishwanath's story. And Titash, I think we can move to the next slide now. This name of the story is, oh no, I think move to the next one. Okay, the next one. Yeah, let's stay here. So his story, Binu the monkey pilot joins the Air Force. published via his blog on 2nd August 2008. He's done a couple of works for Scholastic, and like he's a personally, I feel he's a brilliant writer. But he introduces the tale as a delightful tale about a comedic mix-up, rather a delightfully comedic mix-up tale. The tale highlights a semantic mix-up and the occasional inadequacy of words to convey meaning. Read it and be delighted. The story is very, very simple. Binu PP has dreamt of joining the Basel Nasality Air Force headquarters as a monkey pilot. Now, I would leave it to all of you to kind of, find out or, make sense of this word, what a monkey pilot could mean. His application is accepted in a week's time, and he is asked to join before the beginning of the next week, as it seems that the war is imminent the following week with the fundraiser nation of boring drivel. After much calculation of when he should join as to appear neither over-enthusiastic or unenthusiastic, Binu reports to the Colonel Warnell exactly 3.5 days later. It is then that he realizes the kind of monkey pilots that the Air Force Department is in dire need of is a pilot who is a monkey, and not a human pilot who flies monkeys, as in flying on a monkey. However, given the Basel Nasality Air Force's desperation, Binu is still hired and put along with the monkey pilots for lack of a separate division. Binu's display of his collapsible flying monkey impresses the colonel, whose attitude changes from initial disappointment to a hopeful proclamation that Binu will win us the war. And this leaves Binu filled with feelings of courage and warfulness. So, what is happening over here is that when you read the story and you are expecting, some kind of a subtext, some kind of a meaning that he has, and it actually seems very dense. It seems like those texts like say Catch-22, which has this satirical kind of a take on war, the banality of war, the kind of work that these people need to do, which is also very arbitrary, even though they are given this garb of discipline and repetitiveness. But as we reach towards the end of the story, this is just the first part of the story that Kaushik had written, and he did not end up, eventually end up writing the second story, but you kind of get the feel of what he's trying to do. We realize that, ultimately, and you can see the kind of sentences that he uses. So he uses a lot of these arbitrary piling up of information that does not lead to anything. He plays with words, and it's the same thing repeated over and over again. So he has this penchant of using language in this particular way. And ultimately, you're expecting that something will happen. Maybe there will be some kind of a critique, some kind of a satiric, kind of a element which is there to the text, but there is nothing. So ultimately, the text completely defeats the this intentionality of the writer, or even the way that we perceive text as readers, to lead you into a sense of laughter, and you don't even know at the end of it that why exactly are you laughing. And this is something, I wish I had a little bit more time to kind of go over it, but this is something which I have studied in my works, where in a normal world, the kind of emotions that would have been resulted from reading a text like this, over here the arbitrary of the language kind of changes the world into an upside down world, because of which what happens is that the kind of emotions that are raised are not really led to stagnate over there, but reaches a state of bliss. In a sense, if at the first level of reading the text we are attempting a parody of this text, or ridiculing the, say, for this case, the ridiculing war, at the second level we are transcending the ridicule to ridicule itself. So there is a kind of undoing of the ridicule that is happening, and ultimately there is no purpose to it. So the forceful negation of meaning and emotions, that is leading to the sense of chamatkar or wonder in reading these texts of nonsense. Quickly, to kind of conclude, it is evident how these nonsense texts do not provide the readers or listeners a definite space for arriving at any emotion. And they are doing it by playing with language, stretching them, squeezing them, flipping them upside down. And ultimately, this is accompanied by an evocation of a sense of wonder in most cases. By making the readers confronted with an alternate dimension of reality, reality itself becomes so, so bizarre that the individual state of egos kind of are suspended for the reader to reach a state of pure, unadulterated laughter or chamatkar. And that is, I think, the sense of laughter that Sukumar Ray had also kind of attempted in Abol Tabol. So I think I'll end with that and hope that I can take up most of the things that I've missed up in my presentation in the discussion.
I love that there are actually so many connecting points between both your papers, both of which were so fantastic. I was reading the papers that you'd submitted, and I was learning and I was making notes and thinking of questions, and I'm glad that there are so many connecting points, because that just makes my job easier. I can ask common questions to you both. My first question, though, is kind of semi-specific, because Unudi, your paper title is Nana Sense in a Dunstable Hat. So firstly, why Nana Sense? Is that a sort of linguistic play on your part? And to extend the question to Stella, which both of you can answer this, of course, is what is nonsense? I mean, if it's the absence of sense, who is defining sense? And what happens when these nonsensical words that is used by Sukumar Ray, so many of which, become a part of your regular vocabulary and just regular like vernacular parlance? Like I mean, just before the panel started, I was referring to myself as Ramgun Richana. So I mean, you know, when something like that happens, something that was written about 100-ish years ago as nonsense has filtered in, has become through time a very regular word. You know, how does nonsense translate over time, and why Nana sense, and who defines sense?
Yeah, right. So I should confess at the very outset that Nana sense is completely plagiarized. I have picked up this word from this collection of poems by Sumanyu Satpathy, where he is writing nonsense poetry. But why I found it very apt for the presentation, or you know, why I have since used it in many other works of nonsense that I have done, is because, you know, when we are talking about Nana sense, yes, of course, we are talking about a variety of senses, but we are also talking about na sense. So basically, you know, when we are talking about the negation of the emotion, which becomes a very, very important part in kind of, you know, in works of nonsense. And here the negation of emotion doesn't mean that there is no emotion at all, but the emotions that are raised are very contrary to the kind of expected emotions that you would expect, you know, out of that text. So what happens is that negation of emotion, which again, like if you go through the scholarship of nonsense literature, it keeps coming in every scholar's work, how most of these nonsense texts are negating emotion and why and how. So I found that, you know, if through the use of the word Nana sense, I can kind of bring together both these ideas of, yes, a lot of sense together, but also no sense at all or no emotions at all, which exactly I think is what nonsense, you know, that is what nonsense thrives on. These contradictory pull between something and the stark opposite of it. So, you know, that is where I had kind of taken it. And in terms of understanding the level of sense which is there, how much sense does it make? You know, like I was talking about, many of these, I kind of found these two strands from which the modern literary Indian nonsense develops from. One is the folk tradition, which Stella has already spoken about in her presentation. The other is also the spiritual texts. Like if you go to, you know, Kabir's Ulat Bansi, or, you know, even if you go to the riddles, these are called these Chinese riddles called koans, okay, where they will ask you questions with no probable answer at all. Like if you reach the end of a, you know, I know 200-meter long pole, how much further can you go? And there is no answer to that. Like, you know, you're like, okay, I've already reached the top. How do I go further up? Or something like, okay, now you know, how do you clap with one hand? You know, they have these kind of riddles, and what they are trying to do is that while it is kind of evoking a kind of sense in you, because you're trying to make sense, you know, while you're trying to attain enlightenment, you're trying to find an answer to these very, very difficult questions, but it only defeats the purpose of it, because you realize that there might not be any answer to it, or the answer that you might get to is completely different from something that would be like a logical answer. So I think, you know, that was my purpose in using Nana sense in my presentation today, to try and bring together all these ideas.
So yeah, I think Onurima has already fantastically answered the first part of the question, and also to a certain extent the second part. I mean, if you talk about Shukumar Rai and the way in which he, plays with words, he sort of deliberately uses certain portmanteau words, and the way in which the cadence that is there within the poems, the way in which if you there's this particular poem called Shabda Kalpodrum, and if you look at the way in which he actually uses certain onomatopic sounds all through the poem, and I mean the rhyme and the rhythm and the deliberate use of these sort of words is kind of, I think it has a certain quality within them that kind of makes it popular within the readers. And I mean, he obviously had this definite agenda in mind to attack the pedantry within the supposedly very scholarly, learned people within the Bengali literati. So I think, yeah, I mean, the fact that we use these as very popular idioms or popular colonial words in today's terms, as you said, Ram Guru Richana or Kumra Potash or whatsoever, Huko Moko Hangla, whatever it might be. So, the fact that nonsense itself is a very relative term, and you cannot actually say it's a very subjective term. The difference between sense and nonsense, or the absence of meaning, the absence of sense, is itself a very relative and a subjective category, I think. So
Yeah, so Stella, I was also thinking about this when you were talking about Shukumar Ray's reference to Khyal Rosh. And this is something I think Michael mentions in the introduction of the book of 10th Rasa, where he's talking about how there was a need, while he had a specific agenda, at the same time, it's a very dual sort of a thing that he was doing. Like, at one end, he had a specific agenda of trying to make these texts evoke meaningless laughter in children, so that they would not be kind of restricted by the didactic form of education that was there at that point of time. But the subtext is also that there's that sense of criticism. But even though he was doing such interesting work with these rhymes, chora, which looked so simple, he felt the need to kind of begin his collection of poem with a sort of an apology, kind of connecting it to Khyal Rosh to give it a sense of seriousness. And this is something that we talk about in children's literature also, that every time an author is writing a book, that the person who will be buying the book for the child might not be the child himself or herself. It might be the parent. So the first agenda is to placate the parent that my book is serious enough to be picked up by your kid. And I think that is also very interesting, because I think I remember reading this also, maybe it might be in the introduction to 10th Rasa also, that Tagore himself had done something like that. I think Tagore had evoked the four faces of Brahma, and he had said that nonsense comes out of the fourth face, which is the face of uncontrollable laughter. So, I find it very interesting how at that point of time, even though in the English shores, nonsense was a very much accepted genre, in India, the Indian variety of it, and writers like Tagore and Shukumar Ray, who were in any case big figures, felt the need to begin their work with a kind of an apology that my work is serious enough and you should pick it up. I don't know what you think about this. I thought this was very, very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. It is very interesting, especially, the culture of clubs and the various kinds of, sort of the circles, the literate circles that they had, the meetings that they held during the evenings together, where they talked about literature, where they talked about music and culture. And we have Shukumar Ray's Monday Club or Monda Club, whatever it might be. And then there was also this club previously which was started by Rabindranath Tagore and Gaganendranath Tagore. The name of this club, if I'm not mistaken, is Kham Khiyali Shobha, or something in that sort of direction. So, this idea of, meta sense lying underneath the surface of apparent nonsense is always there. And that, I think, lends, substance and seriousness to this otherwise, very different kind of a generic experimentation altogether. So.
I was going to ask a question about, the dual audience in nonsense first, but the both of you just went ahead and anticipated it and answered it already. So I will move on to the other question that I had, which also it was something that I had asked Sukanta Chaudhary several years ago in after a class that he took with us on how he translated the word Ransubul to Bangla when he translated Lear's poems. I hadn't read the book at the point, his translation. I still haven't read it, to be honest, because I can't find the book. But he told me that I haven't translated it. He didn't say why he didn't translate Ransubul. He just did it. So, I mean, I know Onudi works in translation. I know, Stella, you have also done some translation work. So, how translatable does nonsense work? Is nonsense work? I mean, can nonsense be translated? Is that something that is restricted to cultural specificities?
Well, I think there are, of course, certain difficulties involved in this entire process of translation, especially when it comes to nonsense literature. The very idea of trying to very accurately carry forth certain words or phrases from the source language to the target language, at least, if not accurately, then at least maintaining a certain degree of authenticity and kind of retaining the essence of the entire usage. It is difficult, but then again, as I'll be borrowing from Shukanta Chaudhary's ideas, there's this particular essay on translation where he says that translation is essential, translation and transcreation is essential because it lends a degree of authority on the part of the translator to recreate the text in a different language. And, sort of it disrupts the limitations of the text within the source language. Perhaps there were certain points that were consciously left out by the writer, or perhaps there were certain things that were limited within the perspective of the writer, which is perhaps which gets greater scope when it comes to the work of the translator. So he or she goes on to deconstruct all of these barriers and kind of bring forth the text to new directions altogether. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree with Stella on this, and this is exactly how I would also have responded to the question. Yes, of course, translating nonsense can lead up to levels of untranslatability, because these texts are very much rooted in their local cultures, in the local language, and they're playing with language, they're playing with ideas, they're playing with cultural idioms. So it becomes very, very difficult to kind of find equivalences which would work, like if you're talking about the technical the way that we technically translate. But at the same time, while we have kind of we've reached a place in translation studies where we are trying to look at the democratic space that a translator has, rather than looking at the sacredness of the original text. It is more important now to kind of, we've started discarding faithfulness in favor of transcreation and the interpretive tendency, agency of the translator himself or herself. And from that place, I think the translation of nonsense can actually create new vistas. And because Stella was actually showing a lot of these poems that have been translated, I thought that it might be very interesting to read out the same poem that has been translated by Sampurna Chatterjee, and this is Abul Tabul, which was the first poem that Stella had shown. It begins this way: come happy fool, whimsical cool, come dreaming, dancing, fancy free, come mad musician, glad glucician, beating your drum with glee. So, there is that attempt, like the other poem by Eva, I think you mentioned, right, Stella, if I remember
Chaudhary. Dr.
Yeah.
Ifta Chaudhary. Yeah.
Yeah, so over there, I think she has a different way of playing with the words. And over here, what Sampurna Chatterjee has done is she's coining her own neologisms. So she is also taking it in a very new kind of a direction. And I think that is the kind of freedom that a text of nonsense gives to the translator, because it is very difficult to stick to the original and be like intensely faithful to the original text. Rather, here the translator has a free open ground of being as creative as possible. So this is in a sense a true transcreation if you're attempting a translation of a nonsense text.
Ritvika, you're muted.
Sorry, I froze for a second there. I thought Zoom was going to kick me out or something. Anyway, I have a few more questions. So I'll ask my next question before I think Titash said she had questions. So I'll just ask another question and we'll move on to Titash, which is apart from translating nonsense is not just, of course, as Stella showed us in her presentation, the linguistic play itself, the language itself, because the language is also connected with the illustrations. Only you were planning to talk about OGD, Anushka Ravishankar's, and I mean there is a sort of logical, mathematical nonsense. Stella, you have in your paper, you're talking about the illustrative nonsense. I mean, biological nonsense where you're just portmanteauing animals together. I mean, do you like to? And Shukumara he's sort of also transposing a lot of Carolian creatures to the Bangla context, indigenizing them, so to say. So would you have do either of you have thoughts on how nonsense works in other forms beyond linguistics?
I'm not really sure how to answer this question. Other forms in linguistics. So I don't know. I mean, could you just clarify your question a bit? I'm not really sure how to approach the question.
I'm still trying to sort of figure it out myself. But it's just, I mean, Ray is using illustrations. Ravi Shankar is using mathematics to sort of challenge the world as we see it, sort of challenge. The best I can think is I'm pretty sure that it's how during the early periods of Australia's settler history, colonial history, the indigenous Australian fauna were very puzzling to the Europeans who were heading that way, and they didn't know how to describe the kangaroo and the wallaby and the Tasmanian devil, and they were making up these various words to figure them out. So it seemed in some contexts the kangaroo is very similar for a different group of people to say Kumro Potash or the creature from Hoi Peona. It's just this the nonsensical in anthropology, or the nonsensical in biology, or the nonsensical in maths. If I'm making sense now, I don't know.
Yeah, Ritvika, if I can kind of chip in over here. So, even if I kind of go into the very, very technical study of nonsense and, kind of refer to the kind of text that, most scholars would look at, there is a sense that we can kind of divide, when we are talking about play with something that leads to nonsense, it is at two levels. It could be at the level of linguistics. It could also be at the level of logic. Now, how you're using logic, I think that's where the entire biology and the anthropology, everything is coming over there. Because what is happening is that, most of Stella's presentation or Shukumar's work plays with language. So there is a linguistic wordplay. But if you look at Kaushik's work, or even if you look at OGD, where Anushka Ravishankar is playing with mathematical concepts like Mobius strips and things like that, what it is doing is that it is defeating a logic. Like, say, in Kaushik's story, Monkey Pilot, the monkey pilot is a human who rides a monkey. And he applies for a job where this Air Force base is looking for monkeys who are pilots. So the logical understanding would be that the colonel would take the interview and say that, okay, you do not fit our criteria, so you don't get the job. But he says, no, I'll still give you the job. But because we don't have any other division, you join the division of the monkey pilots. So the monkeys who are the pilots, you join them, even though you are a human who's riding a monkey. So it's like, it's a lot of logic, which is completely getting, overturned. So you are like, this is not what I was expecting, or I would expect in a real life situation. This is just to take an example from this text. But if I go on to pick up more examples from other texts also, this is exactly how nonsense tries to defeat logic. Because the entire idea is that we should not have one meaning to a text. Nonsense kind of, it's by playing with language and by playing with logic, it's opening up the vista of meaning making of these texts. And that, I think, is very, very, it kind of adds a different level of strength to interpretation as readers.
Stella, any thoughts on Sukumar Ray's Portmanteau Animals?
Yeah, I mean, his entire work is actually based, as Onurima has already pointed out, on this very idea of playing with words and structures of grammar, structures of rhyming. He was a fascinating illustrator. He loved to kind of illustrate caricatures and sort of. He actually went abroad and studied a lot about all of that. He was enrolled at a technical school actually. So, I mean, yeah. Drawing all these fantastic beasts. I mean, I'm borrowing this term from Poshali Bhadri, if I'm not wrong. She has conducted extensive research on Sukumar Rai's illustrations. So, the way in which he kind of, makes these compound combinations of creatures with this, these hybrid features come together, not just through these illustrations that he draws, but also through the kind of ideas that he has about them. And there is this, as I said, I mean, he has this very clear-cut idea in his mind that he's going to actually satirize, these laid-back middle-class men. Sorry. I'm sorry, please excuse me. So when he talks about their identity crisis, about the way in which they are sort of mimicking their British superiors, they are kind of submitting to the repressive colonial laws that are meted out to them. And he's at the same time trying to raise the awareness of his readers, of the juvenile readers, the child readers, so as not to kind of think within the quotidian, think within the given set structures of logic and language and rationality, but rather kind of expand the horizon of their creativity, to kind of think beyond the mundane and kind of very readily engage in all these imaginative flights that he himself also takes through his work, and sort of kind of come up with these. So, yeah.
And kind of just to again come in over here a little bit, I just was reminded of this fantastic work by Sukumar Ray. It's called the Heshuram Hoshiare Diary. And over there, it's actually a take on the colonial explorer who has come to a new land. And even though, despite the local flora and fauna having their own set of course, there is nobody to name them, but how the explorer comes and takes that authority to give a name to all of these animals and the plant kinds that he encounters in an alien place. And yeah, exactly. It's a fantastic text, and over there, uh, uh, what Shukumar is actually trying to do is uh, challenge this idea of authority that the colonizers usually take up in cases of kind of nomenclature. Like they come to a new place, they colonize the place, and they also suddenly get the upper hand of being people who give names. Naming somebody is almost in a sense of giving identity to something or someone, or to some place. So in that sense, I feel like even when he's over there are these examples of these animals that we find in like Hashjaru, and what is the name of the poem? I'm forgetting, but
Khichuri. It's
Khichuri, right? Of course, yeah. Khichuri, in the the kind of animals that we find in Khichuri, similar kind of animals are also found in Heshuram Hoshiar. But over there, the way that he's playing with the names, it's almost like kind of making fun of the colonial explorers' authoritative stance of renaming an entire new, the animals and the plants of a local place. So I feel like that is another dimension to the kind of the neologisms coined in terms of naming animals. It's almost like deconstructing that that one name given by a higher authority, but rather keeping it open to be appropriated by anybody in any which way that they want.
You both understood and answered my question better than I expressed it. So thank you. We will take a few audience questions at this point. Okay, Orpita Day is asking, what happens when nonsense starts to make sense? Does it not remain nonsense anymore? Does it transcend into our normative ideas of sense? Anyone, that's a free for all question. Anyone you have?
Yeah, so as I as I already said, that there is this sense of this idea of meter sense that is contained within the nonsense that is employed by Shukumar Rai in his texts, and he's actually trying to pass on a serious message under the